Well, welcome, Colleen, and thanks for joining us today. I'm excited for all of you in our audience to meet Colleen Landkamer. Colleen is a mom and a community leader and has been active in her community for many years. She's also served in local elected office and had many roles in leadership nationally, as well as a two-time presidential appointment to run USDA rural development. And probably most importantly, is she's my sister. So I
That's
would be
right.
remiss if I didn't have Colleen on this podcast as a rural women leader. So I just want to welcome you again today. And thanks so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today. So
Well, I'm glad to be here, Teresa. This will be fun.
this will be fun. I'm excited
Yeah.
about it. And Colleen's one of our initial interviews, so she gets to be the test case here. So let's just kick it off here. And can you share a lesson that you learned from one of our grandmothers? I think that's a good place to start.
You know, the great thing about our grandmothers, especially Grandma Cecilia Keys, was you can do anything. There are no boundaries. And she was always involved and very engaged in the community and in politics for all intents and purposes. So she always pushed you to learn more, to meet people, to learn new things, and be engaged. Be engaged in your family, your community, and your world.
I love it. And so tell us a little bit about what your connection is to rural America.
Well, I am rural for all intents and purposes. I was born in Minneapolis, and we moved to Worthington. My dad was with the State Patrol, so we lived in Worthington for quite a while, Worthington, Minnesota, which is a town right on the border of Iowa, not far from Iowa. We lived there till I was a freshman in high school. Then we moved to Mankato, which is a regional center at this point, but it's rural. There's no two ways about it. So I've always lived in rural. I still live in Mankato. And so I've had jobs that have taken me to other places, but Mankato will always be my home. But it's rural. People don't think they're rural, but they are.
I love it. I love it. And so tell us a little bit more about you, your work, and your community engagement.
Okay. Well, I'm a mom. And we have three sons. My husband passed away a few years ago. Uh, and I was a stay-at-home mom till my youngest was about 4 or something. And so I volunteered on everything. I mean, if the Cancer Society, all the multitude of things that they use stay-at-home moms for, and you volunteer. And the great thing about volunteering is you learn a lot about whatever you're volunteering in, but you also meet a lot of really interesting people that you wouldn't have met otherwise. And it also makes you feel good to give back to your community and be engaged. So I did a lot of volunteering. And then um, I had a friend who worked for Congressman Tim Penny, and they were going to be moving. And she said, "You really should apply for the job." And, you know, I didn't know if I had the skills to work for a congressman, but I applied and I got the job. It started as a part-time job, and within about 2 months, it was a full-time job, and it was outreach. It was helping people with challenges they were having with the federal government, be it Veterans Affairs, be it Health and Human Services, the multitude of things that the federal government does. And sometimes people get lost in the shuffle. So that was my job. I also did outreach and some speaking for the congressman. It was a great opportunity for me. And then a county board seat came open in my community. I live in Blue Earth County, Mankato's the county seat. And some people said, you should really run. And I thought, oh, I don't have enough experience. I don't know enough about what county commissioners do, and I don't have enough experience. But the last minute, the last day I filed was a special election. And I thought, you know, if I don't make it, that's the way it goes. I came in second in the primary and ended up winning the election. County government is so interesting. I really do feel it touches people in a way no other level of government touches people. You've got Health and Human Services, you've got jails, you've got the sheriff, you've got solid waste, you have um, just a multitude of land use, all of the environment, all those things that touch people's lives in so many ways. So it was a great experience for me. Sometimes it's being at the right place at the right time. I was the first woman ever elected in Blue Earth County.
Mhm.
And I was lucky because we had had a board of people that had been there for many, many years. And all of a sudden, there were two men on the board who'd been there for 2 years. And three of us got elected in the next election. It's a 5-member board, and two men and me as a woman, first woman. And one of the guys said to me after we were elected, he goes, "We're a little nervous about having a woman on the board." And I told him he should be, it's but it was, I had great opportunities and I always said yes. I mean, that's how you learn, that's how you meet people, that's how you learn from others, that's how you get engaged. So I was fortunate enough to get to learn a lot about what government does. And oh, let me back up a little. Um, that was the great thing about working for the congressman is understanding how the federal government works. Not a lot of people had that opportunity in the past, and that was really helpful for me. So when I ran, actually the local paper endorsed me saying that I understood how the federal government worked, and other people running didn't. Um, so I had great opportunities to engage in everything the county does. That's the wonderful thing is you learn so much, you get to make decisions, you have a voice, and that's really important. It's not always easy, but boy, it can make a difference in people's lives. So I did that. I ended up being the president of the Association of Minnesota Counties, which is all 87 counties in Minnesota. And then later on, I was the president of the National Association of Counties, which is all 3,066 counties in this nation. I had opportunities to learn from so many people across this country. Um, People are always willing to share to help you make better decisions. And that's why I love the Association of Minnesota Counties and the National Association of Counties because you learn so much from other people. And you can ask any other county person, and they're more than happy to give you that information. After I was president of the National Association of Counties, it was time for me to do something different. And I was lucky enough to have President Obama appoint me to be the state director for USDA Rural Development in Minnesota. And our our goal was to help in make people's lives better with business loans, housing loans, broadband, community facilities, libraries, hospitals, daycare centers, all of those things that make a difference in a community growing and thriving. We also did broadband and electric utilities. So investing in our communities in Minnesota was what we did. We did about $1 billion a year in rural Minnesota, which is a significant number. And then we had an election, and I was presidential appointee. So uh, I went back on the county board. I decided to run for the county board again because it's always kind of been home for me. I love the issues, and I think they're issues that really, really connect with everybody in your county, in your state, and in your nation. Um, I did that, and then we had another election, and President Biden appointed me back to be the state director for USD Rural Development. The senior senator makes that decision to nominate to the president. And so Senator Klobuchar both times was always the one who supported me, and I will forever be thankful to her for trusting me to run this agency in Minnesota. It it does. It just the investments in our communities are so critical, and it makes people able to thrive and grow and build better communities, have better services, and work to increase the opportunities for people in their area, their region, their state. That's kinda my
So
background.
yeah, and so just stepping back a little bit, county
Mhm.
board. So
Yep.
when we think about our audience and we I, I'm not sure on the current statistics, but I know we're well below 20% of in Minnesota of the county commissioners are women, and the majority of those women are either in the 13 county metro area or in a couple of our larger, regional centers. Um, what would how? Tell us a little bit about what is the work and why. Why is it something you think that definitely we need more women, but why do you think it's important for to have more women on county boards, and how do you think they can make an impact?
Well, I think the percentage is about 13% women on county boards. I know, when I ran the first time, I was door knocking, and this woman said to me, "Well, women can't be county commissioners." And I said, "When you think about it," I said, "human services is the biggest part of our budget. And don't you think women understand human services?" "Well, yes, yes, but, I just don't see that as a place for women." And so I put her down as undecided, you know? But human services is huge. Transportation, I got really involved in transportation issues because I was a non-traditional county commissioner and they needed other voices as opposed to just men. Not that I don't like men, because I do. And men have been so important to help me through this. Congressman Tim Penny has always been a great help to me. Men that I've served with on the county board have always been extremely helpful. So it's, but everybody has different perspectives. And that was one of the great things about the county board for me was we all came from different perspectives, which is so important. We had, a teacher from the university. We had a man who did specialties. We had a farmer. We had a man who was an assessor, and you had me coming from the federal government. So, but back to the work. I'm sorry. The environmental issues, the land use issues. I mean, that's stuff that really is important and more important each and every year because finding out what environmentally we need to change or we need to do differently, or what do we have to preserve? And so that's one of the things, ditches. Now, I'm the first to admit I didn't have a ditch in my district, and I trusted the men on my board who had ditches to help me with that. Um, but it's so broad and it's so important. Voting is done at the county level. So ensuring that you've got what people need to vote is critical and that it's safe and secure. And let me tell you, it is safe and secure, contrary to some of the things that are being said about voting. Counties do a fabulous job with voting. But you get your driver's license at the county, you get your passport at the county. I mean, we do human services where, kids who are in challenging situations are taken care of. Seniors are taken care of. SNAP, which is supplemental nutrition for people, is who need a leg up. Counties do that. Counties do everything a city does plus. So we don't do a lot of swimming pools. They always get to do the fun things, but
I love it.
it's the stuff that makes a difference in people's lives. And I will be forever grateful that I was able to be a part of that because it's having a voice, it's talking to people, it's learning what people need and trying to figure out how we can make that happen. A lot of mandates from the state, and that can be really challenging because sometimes the money doesn't come with that mandate. You have to do this, but we're not going to give you any money, but you have to do it anyway. And, counties do a lot of things that people don't like to think happen in their community. Jails, the sheriff, human services, people who are mentally and physically challenged. Counties do all of that. And it's not always the sexiest job in the world by any means, but I think it's a job that makes a difference in people's lives.
So when we think too about folks who are listening in today, sort of the day in the life of a county commissioner. Tell us a little bit about that. How big of a time commitment is it? What are the what are some of the positives about the that elected office, and what are some of the negatives?
I think everybody comes at being a county commissioner in different ways. Most counties in Minnesota are part time. Hennepin and St. Louis are the only ones that aren't. And I got part time pay and a full time job plus. Um, every day was different, which makes it such an exciting job because I never did the same thing every day, you know? In the morning, I might be having a committee meeting with the city of Mankato to figure out how we were going to work together to do some roads or do some housing, things that we needed in our community. But we'd get together with a couple people from the city council and try to figure out how we could move things forward. Later on that morning, I might be talking to the Minnesota Transportation Alliance about um, the infrastructure and how we're going to lobby the federal government in order to get some dollars to do roads, bridges, etc. And there were earmarks when I started. That was one of the strengths that I had was because I understood how it worked in the federal government. We got some really nice earmarks here, and they were important. They weren't, a bridge to nowhere. They were roads that really made a difference and allowed people to move freely. Then I might have a human services meeting or a library meeting, or I sat on about 20 different committees. So the actual board meeting was probably the least amount of time that I spent on the job. Otherwise, it was primarily committees, not only in Blue Earth County, regionally, and at the state and at the federal level. Um, and because I decided that I was going to engage and I was going to know more about what I was doing, having those opportunities to meet with other people, learn from other people. I always say relationships, 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 because you might not get what you want um, from somebody you know, but at least you can have that conversation. And the conversation is really important. And so I've always been a strong believer on building those relationships. And when do you build them? You build them before you need them. I've never had a relationship that I built that I only was looking for a way they could help me. That usually doesn't work really well. But knowing people, learning from people, seeing what other states are doing, what other counties are doing, so you can take that stuff home and hopefully you might tweak it a little, but you can make a difference in your county or your state by doing that. So there isn't a single day that well, frequently there's not a single day that's the same. At a county board meeting, it's, you're going through an agenda and making decisions or taking public testimony or learning about what we're doing with solid waste right now, those types of things. But most of the time, and I always say yes. I mean, I said yes when I was asked to sit on this committee or that committee. I said yes when I decided to run for the state and the national NACO. So I think the engagement is really important. But not everybody does it the same way, but it's an opportunity to learn and also hopefully to make better decisions in your county.
Can you talk a little bit too, I think with some of your national engagement too, I mean, just some of the amazing policy organizations you've, been involved in everywhere from the Humphrey Institute to Harvard to the War College. Can you just talk about some of that? Because I think some of those experiences you've had are just absolutely incredible. And talk a little bit about that and what kind of difference that made for
Yeah.
you.
Let me start out with I never thought I'd do any of those things. It astounds me today that I've had the opportunity to go to Harvard for state and local government and spend 3 weeks there learning more about public policy. But also, and at Harvard, what we did was we did case studies. So, is it good? Is it bad? It's always somewhere in between. So, and you met people at Harvard that will be friends forever. Um, we had a class of 70 people, but extremely diverse with, fire chiefs and mayors and county commissioners and just everybody that works in local government and state government. So you had a lot of legislators too. Um, and you learn from each one of them. It was just such a gift. We lived in dorms, and we had some international. We had 3 guys from Ireland that were engineers and talked about how things worked in Ireland. And, another guy who was the police chief in Trenton, New Jersey, and talked about the different issues that Trenton has as opposed to Mankato, Minnesota. And it gave you relationships that you could call them anytime and ask questions. We had professors that were just amazing. Um, one of our professors worked for John F. Kennedy, and first time he didn't go with him on a trip was Dallas.
Mm.
And so he talked about the policy issues during the Kennedy administration and how what goes around comes around sometimes, and just learning all of those things and learning from other people in the class, which it's all about the War College. I mean, whoever thought I'd go to the War College? Our dad was in the Navy, but they bring in people the last couple of weeks of the War College. It's the Army War College in Carlisle that I went to, but they have all branches of service there. So it was learning about our national defense, our international opportunities that were there. So we got briefings from all branches and from generals, admirals, that type of thing. Most people who go to the military who go to the war college are going to be leading the upper echelon. It's admirals. They will be admirals. They will be generals. They um, will be leading our military for a long time. So it was amazing, and I learned so much, and I built so many relationships there. So that when we had a woman from North Dakota who ran a hospital, and so if I had a question about a hospital, I could call her. Just a lot of guy who ran the largest insurance agency and uh, built the Holocaust Museum. His company was a big part of the Holocaust Museum in DC. So lots of interesting things. Humphrey Fellow, Tim Penny, and Vin Weber, Democrat, Republican, ran that. We had Walter Mondale with us. We had Bob Dole with us. We had just learned so much about policy. And because I've always been in a job where it was policy. And I like policy a lot and I learn a lot and hopefully make decent decisions.
I love it. And just sort of jumping from that to the National Association of Counties, which
Yeah.
and I know you know off the top of your head how many counties there are in the nation. I always forget.
3,066.
Right. So running to be president of that, we always used to tease, I can't remember who it was who used to say it's like the American Legion because
Yeah.
you go through so many steps to become president, but that's a
Yeah.
pretty big piece on your way to becoming president. Can you talk a little bit about, I think one of the biggest accomplishments NACO has ever had that you led, which was the Rural Action Caucus. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how that came together and what kind of impact that has for rural people in America?
I was really lucky. We'd always had a large urban county caucus, which were the 100 largest counties in the nation. And they'd always been there and they would get together and they'd talk about urban issues. And so they decided, the leadership decided that they probably needed to do something for rural. And I chaired, we did a test with the Rural Renaissance, 2 years of a pilot, seeing if we could figure out how to do rural, or how to deal with rural policy as opposed to the broad policy. Right place, right time. The staffer I had decided to bring in Chuck Fluharty from the Rural Policy Research Institute to facilitate our first meeting. And Chuck stuck with us forever. I mean, he was so great. He was the rural voice in the wilderness, I always say. He was one of the few rural voices in DC, and just so smart on policy, had a way of pulling information out of people that they wouldn't think to talk about, but he knew how to do that. I chaired that for 5 years. And we also, in this process, decided that any policy positions that NACO had, they had to have an urban response and a rural response. And, most of our issues are the same with rural and urban. The solutions are a bit different. So, how do you tweak those in order to make it right for rural and right for urban? And where do you compromise? How do you do that? And so it was so much fun. It was, and it made such a difference. And rural finally felt they had a voice because they hadn't in the past that much. So the we went from the Rural Renaissance to the Rural Action Caucus. That was 2 years of the Rural Renaissance, that I co-chaired with a judge from Oregon, and he was fabulous. I mean, smart man, and he'd let me run the meeting, and then he'd wrap it. And then when the Rural Renaissance was over, he decided not to run again, Judge Dale White, and so they made me the chair, and I did that, I think, for 4 years after that. And it's still going strong. It's big, it's large, people are engaged. And right now they're out in DC lobbying Congress about rural issues. And so that lobbying arm is really important. It's information gathering. Lobbying is probably a bad term, but it's talking to congressmen and telling them the impacts that of things that they're thinking about or things they've done. And I think that's really critical. And it was interesting because when we started the Rural Caucus, a lot of our people never talked to their congressperson. And the importance of sharing information with your congresspeople, with your state, um, and making sure that people understand the impacts of policies that they're thinking about doing. You don't always get what you want. And they always say, if you don't get what you experience is when you don't get what you want. Um, and it gives you an experience. But yeah, it was a real gift. And I'm sure, there's no doubt in my mind that because I did that, and when I was the president of National Association of Counties, my whole focus was on how do we get better communication between counties, the president, and the Congress. And that's what we worked on. And they're still working on it. You always work on it. But um, it's those relationships and that information sharing that's so important.
I love it. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but are there any other, like, when you think about it, some of the most rewarding or, different experiences that you've had over your life and your career that you want to share? Because you've gotten to do so many cool things. I'm just curious if there's any other things you want to highlight.
Well, I was really lucky because when I was president, while I was in leadership, and even before I was in leadership, every once in a while, we do some international trips, like with China, Israel, um, uh, a multitude of places, Switzerland. So I got to do some of those and go to those places and learn. I'll never forget being in Israel. I actually led that delegation, and I was going to do a radio interview one morning, and they were going to pick me up on the corner. So I had to leave my hotel and walk through this park, and then the radio station was picking me up and I was gonna do an interview. And I'm walking through this park, and there's a plaque that says, "In memory of Hubert H. Humphrey," and it was donated by the Andreas brothers, where ADM started in Mankato. So it just shows how small that world is. And we had a delegation of about 12 people. We got to see the inner workings of Israel and in Jerusalem, all the security, all the cameras, what they did, the different ways they used energy. They catch all their water on their roof in cisterns, and, just things like that that make such a difference. And also, we met with students because in Israel, when once you graduate from high school, you have to spend 2 years either in the military or community service. And so we met with some of the students who were in that 2 year period, and they were saying how it enhanced their life. They never thought they could do these things, but by spending those 2 years in community service or the military, all of a sudden the world was so much broader. They learned so much, and they had different aspirations than they ever had before. I really like that model. I'd love to see it here. But, learning that those things, going to China, I figured out what it was like to be illiterate because you couldn't understand a street sign. So many people. We went to Tiananmen Square one day and we were on it. I call it the metro, although it's a different term there, but same thing, it's moving people. And I swear if one of the guys wouldn't have grabbed me, I'd still be lost because just so many people. And you learned how what they thought about things. Now, if you asked a question they didn't want to answer, they said they didn't understand you. But yeah, and went to Germany, did high-speed rail, did trains. The difference in Europe and how they get around and how we get around is so different, but learned so much there. Went to Germany, learned about renewable energy, you know, burning garbage, just using so many different ways to create energy and make it better for your country. So those are a few of the things. Harvard was obviously a real exciting time for me, but everything I got to do really, I think, made me a better commissioner, made me make understand more about different things that I would have never seen had I never left my county.
A little bit about Switzerland, if I remember correctly, that
Yeah.
was that all women?
All women. I got a
Yeah.
call one day saying, "My name is Carrie Douglas. I'm the public information officer for the Swiss Embassy, and we'd like to invite you to go to Switzerland with a bunch of women and talk about women's issues. Of course, we'll pay for everything. And would you be interested?" That took about 2 seconds for me to say yes. So I went with a woman who had worked for ran the Department of Energy, a woman who started Black Women United, uh, General Wilma Vaught, who just got about a year ago, year and a half ago, the Medal of Honor from President Biden, um, a book publisher, an author, a large business owner. So I was with these smart, fabulous women, and we went all over Switzerland. One day, the military took us up in Lollapalomas, which is a really large helicopter, and we saw how their military worked. They put their planes in the mountains, and so we got to do all that. I learned more about the military, about business, about Black Women United, how it started, why it started, and just these women that were just amazing and taught me so much, but also introduced me to other people that I learned from. So Switzerland was really amazing. And, the issues were the same for women in Switzerland as they are in the US. Less pay than men, daycare, hours for working. The issues are pretty much the same worldwide, pretty much.
Oh,
But they were
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, and what an experience, and I think so when you think about when you were a young kid, did you have did you have any idea what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Isn't that sad? I didn't. Um, I I I figured I'd probably get married and have a couple kids maybe, but it never occurred to me that, I would get the opportunities that I got, and a lot of it's being at the right place at the right time and just being lucky, but also doing the work, um, you know, do the work, and expect to do the work, and I, um, I always did that, and I really liked it, but, um I never thought that I would ever get the opportunities that I've had, and I'm I'm old now, as you know, so it's my job right now to lift women up, and that's what Teresa does each and every day with 100 Rural Women.
There's our
Um,
commercial. There's our commercial.
that's right, but it's true. I mean, how do we lift women up? How do we give them the opportunities? How do we make them understand that they're smarter than anybody,
Mhm.
and they can do anything they wanna do, and how do we help them do that?
Yeah, and I think too, we probably minimize the family we grew up in also that was
Yeah,
so community service, public service oriented, and such positive reinforcement that you can do anything
yeah,
and we'll be there to support you. So when you think about that, you have had just like a super career. You've had all this community service, you've raised 3 kids, you have grandchildren, you're involved in the community. What do you do for fun? And how do you and then when you think about all the work you do and everything you've been so busy, how do you recharge? What do you do to take care of yourself? How did you navigate all those years being the only woman on the county board and always sort of navigating through? I mean, how do you balance that in your life with fun and self-care and
yeah.
recharging?
I don't know if I got a lot of balance in my life, I'm the first to admit that, but what I do for fun is hanging out with friends, hanging out with my family. I'm so lucky I get to hang out with Teresa frequently, and it's still never enough, but I get to do that, and we've got 2 brothers who, are Pat was the chief public defender in Ramsey County, Kevin was the head of the highway patrol, and then the international police were Teresa's done more than all of us put together combined. And my mom and my dad, they always were supportive of us no matter what. So what do I do for fun? I hang out with my friends. I hang out with my grandkids. I I get to go travel, and I love to travel, and because you learn when you travel and you meet interesting people, but I read, and you gotta be, we're living in challenging times, but you gotta be positive because it doesn't do you any good not to be. So, how do we continue to be positive, to move things forward, and how do we make sure that I wanna say our grandkids, because I worry about my grandkids. I wanna make sure that they've got the best lives they can have, and so that's my focus.
Mhm. Mhm. So when you think about that too, what gives you hope for the future? Because I know that that's the thing I always try and focus on the positive, and it's really hard these days sometimes to
Yeah.
focus on the positive, but it's super important. But when you think about it, what does give you hope for the future? How do you think we're gonna get through all this? What do you think? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is I look at our 2 senators, Klobuchar and Smith, and they give me hope. And Chris Coons, who used to be a county exec, and he's, a US senator in Delaware. I know how smart those people are. I know how much they care about people, and they give me hope. My grandkids give me hope. Various people who are, out there talking about what's important for our state, our nation, and my city. So I have hope with people that I trust, and I know that that pendulum will swing. I just want to swing it a little faster than it is. I have hope because I believe in people doing the right thing eventually.
And so just to today a little bit, what you're up to today, So when I think of hope too, I think of like, I know that you just went on the board for the Mankato Area Foundation. Can you just talk about a little bit about that and where you see that as being a positive in your community?
Yeah. Um, the Mankato Area Foundation is obviously a nonprofit, but they're going to have resources to help people. And we're going to need a lot of help right now. I mean, I think in general, it's a foundation that has opportunities for to invest in people, in people who don't have much, or in organizations that help people who don't have much. Glenn Taylor, who ran Taylor Corporation and is very involved in like the Timberwolves and a bunch of other sports teams, the Star Trib, a multitude of things. He's donating a portion of his proceeds from his farms in rural places to the Mankato Area Foundation, to the Southern Minnesota Initiative Fund, and the St. Paul Foundation. So people who are willing to invest in our future and our future for all, kids, seniors, people who have needs. And so that gives me hope. It gives me hope. And the investments that the Mankato Area Foundation are making, the investments they're making, are making a difference in people's lives each and every day. Is there enough money? Probably not, but it's making a difference, and everything that we can do to lift people up is what they do. So I'm I'm really excited to be on that. I when I retired, I said I wasn't gonna do anything, and then I said yes. But, they it's a great foundation, and, there's a great leader, Nancy Zellick, who's making a difference.
No, I love it, and I think that's one thing when we think about, how engaged you've been in your community and how important that is, and for folks to be aware of your community foundations, and in Minnesota, we're just super blessed to have
They are.
so many rural foundations because in a lot of states there's foundations, but not focused in rural and
Yeah.
some of our regional centers. So I think that's a huge benefit that I hope people check out. And so I just want to step into here. What do you think? I mean, 100 Rural Women's all about this. And of course, you're a rural
Yeah.
woman and rural leader. Um, what can we all do to better support rural women? What do you think some of the things are that we can do to better support each other as rural women?
Well, I think some of the things you're doing really helps. For instance, you do morning connections where people can just talk about what's going on in their community and things that they see that probably need to change or don't not change, and how do they help, and having rural women understand that they're just as competent as anybody else in that community to make decisions. I think women have, and I'll use myself as an example. When I ran for the county board, I said, well, I don't know enough. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know enough. Well, so I had said this to one of the guys that I got elected with. And I had said, I was scared to death to run because I didn't think I knew enough. And he looked at me and he goes, my gosh, Colleen, he goes, you were a congressional staffer. You understand how it works at the federal, state, and local level. How did you think you didn't know enough? I think women always think they don't know enough, whereas they know more than many, many other people in that community. So helping women see that, yeah, I can do this. And yeah, I'll help you do that is really critical too. And so building those connections, the information, to me, that's how we help rural women. And um, I that's what I love about 100 Rural Women is it's, getting women in appointed positions, elected positions, or lifting them up so they can move forward in wherever they're working. And and that it's great also to be a stay-at-home mom. And how can we help you with things that you need to think about, uh, childcare, all of those things. So I I think it's being that support, that bridge to make people understand that, yeah, they have all the skills, they just don't realize it.
Yeah, I think what we learned in our initial research was it was leadership confidence. And I just think too, just serving on school board and when I left trying to get people to run for school board, because I wanted
Yeah,
to make sure I had a lot of people running to replace me and meeting with women say, well, I don't know about finance or I don't know about
yeah,
this. It's like, well, you bring so much to the table. So I think
right.
women have a tendency to say, well, I don't know everything, so I'm not going to do it. Where
Yeah,
men are just like, oh yeah, well, I could do that.
yeah,
So I think that's an important piece. And I know that you
yeah,
and a couple of your former colleagues on the county board have helped over the last, 5, 6 elections for women that do want to run for county board.
right.
Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, we actually any woman who, came out of the primary, we sent an email to them saying, "We're gonna do this training, it's not gonna cost you any money, and we're just gonna tell you what our experiences were and answer any questions that you might be interested in." We don't endorse, and we had about half the people running take us up on it, which kind of surprised me because when I ran the first time, if anybody would have offered that, I would have jumped on it like there was no tomorrow. So we went through, how do you raise money, finances, what the issues are, and issues come and go. I always remember I talked to a man who'd been on my county board for 40 years and didn't run the year that I decided to run. And I asked him, I said, so what are the issues? And he looked at me and he goes, issues come and go, Colleen. He said, it's your value system that counts. And he said, if the courthouse collapsed tomorrow, you'd have different issues than got today. So, you know, um, that's the important thing is and knowing you've got support from other women or men is really important. But, who likes to raise money? I hate it. Maybe, some people are fine with it, but I hate it. But you have to do some of that stuff. And how do you get people engaged in your campaign and how do you continue to roll that forward? Um, people are wonderful, but they need to be asked. And I think it's really important for I've tried to make a practice of asking women to run for the county board. I always go with the county board. I mean, if they want to run for the legislature, that's good too. If they want to run for city council, that's good too. But I'm a little prejudiced. I think county boards are just where it's at.
Yeah, and that
Does
ask is
that?
so important so people can
Yeah.
see themselves doing that. I
Yep.
totally agree
Yeah.
on that. Yeah,
And making
absolutely.
sure that that they know that you know they have the skills to do this, making them feel good. The ask is really important.
And I think
You're
also
right.
another thing we heard from women was public acknowledgement. So,
Yeah.
number 1, to run, but then once you're in office and as women are navigating and sometimes alone on a board, like you were the only woman on the board, but just
Yeah.
making sure you public acknowledge what they're trying to do and figure out how you can
Yeah.
support them is super important too. I
It is
agree with
really
that.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was a new commissioner and I got myself on transportation and ag policy committee um, at at the state, and so I'm the only woman in this group, a bunch of guys, and one of the guys came over and literally patted me on the head and said, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about this stuff. We'll tell you, how to do this stuff." And I said, that would be so great. I would really appreciate that. I said, I always get a little confused in the farm bill if Sudbuster Swap Buster is 256C or 258D. Can you help me with that? And he kind of stepped back and he goes, "Oh, I guess you do know something about egg." Um, I worked for Tim Penny. Tim was on the egg committee. Deciding what hills you have to die that are worth
Mhm.
dying on. You need to think about that. And also just trying to figure out how you're going to get along with people is not that you have to give anything up, but there are times, lead follower, get out of the way. And making those decisions is important. I'm really glad I was a commissioner when I was, because I think it was an easier place to be than it is now.
Yeah, it's that old adage of when you go into those local government roles that you hang your political hat at the door, and that's not necessarily happening today, which is super
Yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah, yeah.
So what do you think, Colleen, when you think about what this is sort of our wrap here, and really have appreciated your time. And I want to end with this piece is sort of like, what advice would you give your younger self?
Take risks, trust yourself, because I don't think I did a lot of that. And, I was lucky I had to go back to work. Um, Financially, we needed me to. And that was, I mean, really a good thing. Because otherwise I wouldn't have done any of this probably. I don't know if that makes any sense. But
No, it does.
I, uh, trust yourself, take risks, get engaged, build relationships, and learn about your community. Find what your passions are, and follow them.
So, and that's good advice that you would give your younger self. What about in particular for young rural women? What kind of advice do you have for them to be able to navigate? And
I think say yes, and I say that all the time, but say yes. When somebody asks you to do the Heart Association door to door, do it. Um, get to know other women and other men in your community, and power is the wrong term, but people who are in elected office, get to know them, talk to them, because they need to hear from you just as much as yeah, as you want to have them hear from you. But but build some of those relationships and engage and trust yourself. Trust yourself, and that's really hard to do sometimes. But find a cohort, find other people who will help you, support you, and be supportive of other people too. So it's a two-way street.
I love it. Anything else that you want to add before we close here?
Probably a million things, but I can't think of anything. But hopefully, I made sense today. But this was great, and it's always fun to talk to Teresa.
No, it's good, and I really appreciate your time. And the whole thought behind this podcast is to make our information, our programming more accessible, but also for people to hear about women's journeys because they're absolutely amazing. And our hope is that people will learn from that and see, oh, that's how she did that. Well, I could do that,
Yeah,
or that's amazing. So I just really appreciate your time today, and thanks so much for being one of the first people on our podcast. So I love it.
thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.